I'm going to hand over to Georgina, who is on the African Labour Law Society Management Committee. She is based in Nairobi in Kenya. She is a legal officer at Airtel in Kenya. And she's an excellent long-time supporter from the very first meeting that we had with the ILO in 2015 in Cape Town. So thank you, Georgina, for hosting and moderating the talk this afternoon. Please put your questions or discussion points in the chat. As I'm running the slides, it'll be tricky for me to look at those, but Georgina will keep an eye on them, and then we'll leave some time at the end for questions and answers. So over to you, Georgina. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. Thank you very much, Connor. Always very good support in the background in terms of everything that we do as a society. As Claire said, my name is Georgina Ogalo. I am a member of the Management Committee of the Africa Labour Law Society. The Labour Law Society was a brainchild of, I would say, scholars and also legal practitioners in the field of employment and labour law that came out of a small coffee discussion in 2015 when we were attending a conference in Cape Town. And we were looking at, we had a lot of representation from other continents, Europe and America, but what about one for Africa? And that would cut across the globe in terms of exposure and then also sharing of what's been going on within that scene across the African continent. And then that's how the society came about. And we've been spreading quite a bit, very fast over the past slightly under a decade with the support of Claire and also with our current support of our president, Dr. Pami Bamu, who would have wanted to be on the call, but unfortunately had another engagement. But you will be able to see all of us in Mauritius in March, where we'll be having our 5th conference, and where we'll be having discussions related to some of the key topical areas in terms of labor and employment law. So towards the conference and also to support our members across the globe, we have webinars which are free that we conduct monthly or every other month on topical areas. And today specifically, we have a webinar being conducted by Desmond Odhiambo, who is a partner at Cliff Decker Hoffmeyer here in Nairobi, Kenya. Desmond is also a member of the society and has been very supportive in terms of our activities. He spoke at our last conference. That was in 2021 here in Nairobi, and will also be speaking at the conference in Mauritius. And just ahead of that conference, he's going to be sharing some of his insights in terms of going digital, building effective dispute resolution and collective bargaining and social dialogue on digital platforms. Why is this an important topic, and more so for Desmond? Desmond has been in dispute resolution practice for over a decade. He is currently, as I said, partner at Cliff Decker Hoffmeyer in the dispute resolution and employment law, as well as business rescue, restructuring, and insolvency practice areas. He does a lot of dispute resolution, risk advisory, and regulatory services to clients across Kenya and in various jurisdictions in Africa. And his key industry sectors are banking, telecommunications, engineering, and construction sectors. He has contributed quite a bit in terms of the discussion on dispute resolution, having been an active contributor to Lexology publication, the Kenyan chapter. He's a qualified mediator and a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. He is also a member of the Law Society Alternative Disputes Resolution Committee. So with that kind of experience and background, I welcome my colleague, a good friend, just to take us off in terms of this discussion on going digital. One of those examples of going digital is that it has opened up the ability for us to all be from different corners of the world on this webinar. And similarly, we've also seen how changes have had to happen across the courts and also in terms of dispute resolution mechanisms such as mediation and arbitration to ensure that everybody gets to participate in this process. And Desmond will now be taking us through that. Just before Desmond starts, if you have any questions, we'll restrict restrict that to the end of the presentation. But in the meantime, please feel free to drop your questions, comments in the chats. Let's keep it as live and lovely as we can. And I'll be supporting that towards the end. So welcome, Desmond.
Thank you very much, Georgina, for that kind introduction. And welcome everybody to this webinar. I'm glad to see that there are participants from all over the globe, which would enrich our discussion today. I aim for it to be a discussion and not to be a lecture, as I share a few insights and perspectives on this topic, and also just to highlight the opportunities that exist within the African continent, and also the challenges that we are facing in terms of building effective dispute resolution and social dialogue on digital platforms. So perhaps we could just begin with a few definitions, just for the benefit of any members of the audience who may not be familiar with some of the terms. Just for as a definition, what do we mean when we talk about social dialogue? So social dialogue just basically means, any discussion or any consultations or any negotiations between two parties in an industry. And for our context, between the employer and the employee at its very basic level. And so we'll be looking at types of forms of social dialogue as we go along in the presentation. The next term I would like to define is dispute resolution. So still on the previous slide. So dispute resolution is the process of, settling differences between parties. And in our context, we'll be looking at resolution of disputes through the court, what we usually refer to as litigation, or through arbitration, where you have a private mechanism of resolving the dispute, or through mediation, where you have a third party that assists the two protagonists reach an amicable settlement. And then the third term I would like to define, so that you may be able to track my presentation, is what we refer to as digitalization. And so this is the use of technology to enhance and transform existing business processes. And the processes that we'll be looking at are social dialogue and dispute resolution. Thank you. So we could go to the next slide. So just an overview of social dialogue to lay additional context to it. So as I mentioned, social dialogue requires at least two parties. So in the labor context, you require at least the employer and you require the employee. In some cases, you may find that the employee is represented by a trade union where they're unionized, or there may be some other representative body, for the employees, that would participate in that social dialogue. So that's at its basic level, a bipartite. Some people describe it as a bipartite form of social dialogue. The next, the higher level of social dialogue, and which is still on the previous slide, which is the most effective form of dialogue, is what we describe as a tripartite form, or a multi-party social dialogue. And this is where you have an additional party other than the employer and the employee. You have the government that is involved in the discussions. And in some instances, you have the civil society also involved in the discussions. Why is this important? If we look at its basic form, in a bipartite situation, just employer and employee, the discussion will mostly center around the terms and conditions of work. Better pay, working hours, sick leave, annual leave, typical terms that you'd find in a collective bargaining agreement, which is one form of social dialogue. But when we go into a tripartite form of social dialogue, the government being involved helps in discussions of things that will have a wider policy implication and things that could be reduced or may require legislative intervention. So in such instances, it is important to have the government as well as part of that dialogue. If I was to give context also for example, in Kenya, one of the reasons or one of the reasons why our Employment Act is progressive is because it's born out of dialogue between the three parties, that is the government, the employers, and the employees. Civil society would normally be involved as well. It is encouraged that they're involved, although many employers would be reluctant to invite the civil society on board. But they shouldn't, because the objective of the civil society is to really promote the interests of the wider stakeholders, that is the society itself, or the environment. They can also be referred to as the environment. So the civil society will be looking at things such as diversity, things such as promotion of or protection of persons with disabilities, things to do with climate change or good governance. So the civil society plays an important role in that respect. So we can go to the next slide. So the importance of social dialogue. So social dialogue, it's not a new concept. As you can see, there's a definition there from ILO in 1944. And it still plays a central role to our society, and it is one of the SDG pillars to achieve. So part of the SDG 8, which is the promotion of decent work and economic growth. And as we proceed along the presentation, you will see why that plays an even more crucial role now. So social dialogue also helps in terms of sound governance. It improves the quality of policy that we come up with. It also builds trust and commitment to policies that we come up with. And the reason for this is that if an employer engages the employees when coming up with a policy, there's likelihood that the employees will buy into the policy that is being introduced, and therefore there will be a greater alignment with it. It also helps to resolve differences. In any where there's two parties or more involved, there'll always be a situation where there's a difference. So the question really is, how do we resolve those differences? So social dialogues really aids in dispute resolution. We can move into the next slide. Some of the examples that we can give just to see how social dialogue has helped, and so that we can relate with it even more. So we've seen social dialogue being useful in the social political crisis in many African countries. One example I would give, for instance, would be the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation initiative in South Africa. That help to address injustices of the past. We can also cite examples of Kenya after the post-election violence of 2008. The Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission helped, just to bring some of the issues to the fore so that people could speak about it and find a resolution, a way forward from it. in modern day workforce, social dialogue has also been used to address emerging areas of work, such as in the gig economy, where you have platform workers who it's not very clear what their status is. Are they employees or are they independent contractors? An example of platform workers are the Uber drivers. And we have seen interesting cases, coming out from the UK jurisdiction, where they have been recognized as employees. But if you were to drill down, you would find that the genesis of that case was really, in the background was a movement where there was an association for the Uber drivers that really brought the issues of the Uber drivers to the fore. And so social dialogue can be used to address some of the issues of these emerging areas of work that we really do not know how to address. And so it is still relevant to the world of work today. We can move on to the next slide. So what are some of the elements of effective social dialogue? I think even before we look at how we can use the digital platform to promote social dialogue, it is important for us just to consider what are the elements for effective social dialogue. And one important element of effective social dialogue is continued engagement and monitoring by the parties concerned. And I would like to give an example. One of the telecos, the big telecommunication companies in Kenya, came up with a system where they asked the employees to form a committee and have representatives in that committee that are not part of management. And this worker representation group or committee had frequent meetings with the CEO himself. And in those meetings, the CEO encourages them to bring out issues that concern their respective job groups. So it could be drivers, or it could be the teleworkers, and so that continuous engagement has really helped this telecommunication company in coming up with solutions that have not been seen before in the industry. And even attempts by the various trade unions to try and gain membership from this big telecommunication firm to try and get the employees to join their union have not borne fruit despite repeated overtures. And that's because really the employees see the benefits of the continuous engagement and monitoring because they take minutes, and the CEO is held accountable because the minutes are because they track the implementation of what they have discussed. So that's an essential element to have an effective social dialogue. The other element is information exchange. For effective social dialogue, there has to be access to information, whether it is from the employees. So the employees need information from their employers, or they need information from their trade unions or worker representation groups, information that would guide them on the policies of the organization or on the benefits of their basic economic and social rights. So how do we pass on that information is what we'll be considering, whether any tool is effective or not as a means for social dialogue. The other is enabling tripartite consultations and negotiations Or in other words, collectivism? Does it allow for a collective voice, and does it allow participation across different stakeholders? And then finally, dispute resolution. How do we resolve differences that arise? So look at the next slide. So the opportunities that have been availed on online platforms, there are various digital tools that can be used to enhance social dialogue. So when we talk about access to information, it is now easier for employers, for instance, to pass on information to employees about their policies or about the vision or strategic direction of the organization, either through their websites or through emails or through online newsletters. Trade unions can also use these forms as a means of educating their members and just informing them, what are their basic rights, so that the members can be able to know and can be and are aware, what they are entitled to, so that even as they make decisions that would affect their welfare, they do so from an informed positions. Other tools include online surveys. So trade unions or worker representatives can be able to take surveys, on their members on things that affect them, and these surveys can be used with with employees working from different geographical locations. So it's an easier and an affordable way of just finding out the issues that concern employees. Another tool is the social media, which is a great tool for mobilization of the employees, which is key for trade unions. And then also virtual platforms, which is helpful in terms of just having a place where you can have a discussion, and the virtual platforms even have breakout rooms in the event that in the course of the discussion you want to break out into a separate room just to discuss amongst your members the proposals made by the other side. So the opportunity that is available, there's an immense opportunity for the social parties on using the online platforms, and this really enhances enhances, for instance, even the membership for trade unions when it comes to getting new members onto their unions, or a wider representation. It is easier to mobilize people using these platforms. Collectivism as well is also, you are able to achieve that using the online platforms, although to some extent, and we will see some of the challenges with the digital workforce, that it's not always easy to mobilize people, and we'll see some of those limitations. And then in terms of the ability to be able to monitor implementation of resolutions that are reached, the platforms that allow for recording of the meetings, which is a great feature. They also allow for quick polls to be taken in the course of the meetings in case immediate feedback is needed from the meeting. We can go on to the next slide. Oh, sorry. Maybe just back to the previous slide. Yeah, sorry, it is not on my slide, but some of the challenges with the online platform when it comes to social dialogue is when it comes to how to mobilize remote workers, people who are working remotely, which is a feature that is now more common than it was pre-COVID, because you find now people have different work schedules, and also people, do not necessarily come to a single workspace where they could meet, for instance, during their breaks, and just have off-the-cuff conversations where it would be easy to spot or to identify the issues they are facing. So that poses a challenge to collectivitism, and so I think it's something that we have to sort of continue discussing and seeing how can we mitigate that challenge. And one of the ways that we can mitigate that challenge is, for instance, just having networking events. They could be even online or physical networking events, especially for the gig workers, so that you have an opportunity just to create awareness, and you have an opportunity to mobilize them, to mobilize them to address the issues that they face. This is something that probably the trade unions should consider, because for the gig workers, for instance, content creators that are located in different geographical locations, they may just need an opportunity to come together. So a trade union that, for instance, or even one of the gig workers, just for instance, creating an event, a networking event where they can come together and discuss the issues that they face, would be a good starting point for them now to be able to form a collective body that would now articulate their concerns. And if the government is involved, even better, if you have a representative from government involved in those discussions, because the question now is really how do we regulate the space, the gig economy, and how do we protect the workers in the gig economy from exploitation? How do we enable them to access information, to know whether what they are receiving is adequate enough, so such events or such initiatives would be important to be able to mitigate the challenges of mobilizing digital workers or platform workers. So we can look at the digitalization of dispute resolution. So when we talk of digitalization of dispute resolution, I think with the advent of COVID, we saw a great move to online dispute resolution, and especially so in Africa. Before COVID, it was just something that we would discuss in conferences, but COVID really forced many African countries to shift to the digital platform. And one way in which this shift occurred is in terms of enabling e-filing, so digitalization of the process for filing of cases. So for instance, in Kenya, there's an initiative that was brought about by the practice directions in 2020, which now introduced the e-filing system for court documents and even service of documents through WhatsApp. So which really revolutionized dispute resolution. This form of online dispute resolution was also carried forward in alternative forms of dispute resolution, such as mediation, where the court annexed mediation, which is a mandatory form of mediation that is common in many African jurisdictions, especially in East Africa, So many of the mediators took advantage of the online digital platforms such as Zoom, Google Meet, to be able to conduct their sessions, and the ability to have breakout rooms, proved very convenient for the mediators, and it also proved very convenient for the parties because you wouldn't have to, travel or waste time in traffic just to be able to have your matter resolved before a mediator. Can move on to the next one. Yes, so that is just a screenshot of what is available in the court and the judiciary website. So they have even enabled access to information to the public on how to access court-annexed mediation. Which has promoted access to justice. So the more and the readily available information is there for the public, and then the more effective mediation is as a tool of resolving disputes. And one of the success stories of mediation in Kenya is that mediation, has really helped in reducing the backlog of cases. So in terms of resolving labor disputes, it is a great tool to reduce the backlog of cases before the magistrates and the judges. And so the digitalization of this process has promoted access to justice. I can move on to the next slide. The barriers to digitalization, though, in Africa is first and foremost that there is a lack of access to electricity or unstable access to electricity in many African countries. So that is an infrastructural barrier, and because of this barrier, you find that there are sections of the society that are not able to effectively use the online dispute resolution mechanisms. Unstable access, we refer to, for instance, the power outages in some of the countries. So, for instance, in South Africa, we have seen recently that the load shedding has been referred to as, as a national crisis, and this, of course, impedes the smooth operation of the dispute resolution through the online platform. Then the other barrier is poor technology and network infrastructure. So in Africa, you find that there is still a way to go to develop our ICT infrastructure. Some African countries have made more strides than others, but they still, initiatives still need to be made to ensure that we have adequate telecom towers and cable broadband lines so as to enable internet access. In some cases, we have seen, governments around election times sabotaging the existing infrastructure so that, the ease of access to information, is impeded. And the other barrier is high internet costs. There's a report in 2021 which provided that sub-Saharan Africa was the most expensive region in the world for mobile data. So that is a concern. And then there's still a low proliferation of digital technologies. So in the 2021 study, it found that a majority of Africans, just own a basic phone that does not connect to the internet. So a majority do not have smartphones that would connect to the internet, and which, would impede use of, the online dispute resolution mechanism, as well as the online forms of social dialogue. They would have limited access to it. Then there's also low digital literacy overall. In urban centers, yes, there's some digital literacy to a certain degree, but in a majority of our rural population and townships, there's low digital literacy and little to no exposure of the internet or computers. So you find a majority do not even have an email address, which forms a barrier as compared to other parts of the world. Ways to mitigate these barriers, it requires a tripartite solution. So it will require, investment by government. We can move on to the next slide. It will require investment by government. So investment to the next slide. Investment in off-grid electricity alternatives, such as the solar home solutions, both commercial and industrial solar. It would also require investment in collaboration and innovation around technology. So for instance, development and deployment of 5G balloons. Then it will also require us to utilize existing ICT the existing ICT infrastructure that we use. So in Africa, the most common ICT or the most common ICT infrastructure we have is the basic mobile phone that has a USSD provision. So with a USSD provision, you can still be able to send out bulk SMSs, or you can carry out some short surveys. You can spread, there's communication through the SSB communication. So for instance, like how the Kenya National Examination Council normally disperses information on the results of the candidates that have sat their final exams in school. So use of that basic form can still be leveraged to ease social dialogue or access to information for purposes of social dialogue. And then another way to mitigate it is to create accessible digital spaces. And what we mean by this is to really invest in community civic centers and equip them with the ICT infrastructure, so that people can be able to access them if they need, for instance, to attend an online court proceeding, or if they need to attend an online meeting as concerns the organization. And then lastly is the rollout of digital literacy programs and trainings. Then another way also to mitigate barriers for online dispute resolutions is really to encourage a private mechanism for resolution of disputes. So if instead of burdening the existing court system, one of the things that employers and employees can consider is to have a conflict resolution clause in the employment agreements that provide, for negotiation as a first instance, and then mediation, and then, arbitration. And the benefit of having such a private mechanism for resolving disputes is that you are able also to use private resources to resolve that dispute. And so you relieve the government from the burden of having to provide that infrastructure. And it aids in also easing the backlog in the judiciary. So that is something that the social parties need to consider. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions so that we can discuss it further.
Thank you very much, Desmond, for that. I really appreciate the fact that you also looked into some of the barriers in terms of going digital, especially some of the issues that we had to face within Africa and across the globe. Especially now, let's say from parties that have matters in courts, them having to have that accessibility to technology, and then also understanding the structures for that. That you well highlighted on that and some of the things that we can work on. Just before I go into maybe questions from the participants, I just want to know, where do we see ourselves in, I would say, 5 or 10 years from now? We never really saw COVID shutting down the world the way it did, but it caused us to really shift in the way we were operating and then also to embrace technology. Are we looking at a situation that we will continue on these platforms? Will it be a potential hybrid? And then also my last question is, what happens to, I would say, the handshake that seals any agreement or a deal? Some people are still very, I wouldn't even say, the emphasis is that I want to see you face to face. I want to have those negotiations. And then once we agree on something, we put a handshake to it and it is now formalized. Where do we go from there?
Yeah, thank you, Georgina. Good questions. I think to start with the first one, going forward, I think it will be a hybrid. It will be a hybrid situation. And so when it comes to, at least for dispute resolution, we find, both parties have found it that it is convenient, for instance, to meet on an online platform rather than travel far distances to a physical courtroom, or even just waste time in traffic in a physical courtroom. So the judiciary, on the one hand, has seen the savings in terms of time, and also the litigants have seen the savings in terms of time and even the cost of litigation, because if you have an e-filing system, it means you do not have to print bulks of paper. So even the fee notes that is coming from your lawyer, it has less and less disbursements on it, because everything is being done.
Be honest about that, Desmond. Are you sure that the fee notes are less?
Yeah, hopefully they are getting better. It's becoming cheaper. So the benefits are there. Of course, there are benefits of an in-person engagement, and especially when it comes to a negotiation. That in-person engagement, over a cup of tea, is usually our default position, and is usually the preferred mode. But in terms of just making it more accessible to a wider population, I think the online platforms still provide that opportunity. So, for instance, if you look at the court annexed mediation, the mediators use the physical courtrooms to conduct their mediation, because many of them do not have the facilities in their private chambers, to have multiple rooms in your offices for purposes of breakout sessions. So online platform helps in that. I think in terms of concluding a resolution or an agreement, yes, we still have to rely, we have to trust that the online handshake is as good as the physical handshake, and that once we put ink to paper and the parties sign on it with their digital signatures, that it is still as binding as the one that was reached after a physical handshake and a wet signature.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Desmond. So at this point, I'll open up for questions. I can see a hand up. I think that's a digital participant 014783360.
Hi, Georgina, thanks very much. It's Shane Godfrey from University of Cape Town. I just wanted to ask the presenter and thank him for an interesting presentation. To what extent are we talking Africa more broadly? Or are we talking about the Kenyan experience? So to what extent has what you learned in Kenya, can you generalize across the continent and say that this has been as successful and sort of cost effective across the continent? And has there been any research around this? Has there been research more broadly on user experiences and preferences? And before we go forward into a hybrid model and say this is the way we're going, any research on outcomes? Has being online impacted outcomes in any way? Those, I just wondered around those sorts of questions, whether we have a broader data that we could look at. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Shane, I think. Thank you for that question. So my presentation is largely born out of experience within Kenya and the larger East Africa region. So we probably would need more research to find out what the experience is broadly across the whole of Africa. And in answer to your question as to whether it is cost effective, that is also borne out from views or feedback that we've received largely from Kenya. We would need to do broader research for the whole of Africa. In terms of user preference, whether there has been research on that, a quantitative research, I think that is a gap that we need to fill. So in the course of even in preparing for this webinar, a lot of the research is really from Europe as to the effectiveness of online dispute resolution in terms of quantitative research. So I think that's a gap that probably our institutions can take up just to find out in terms of the statistics, what are we looking at? But broadly speaking, in terms of, for instance, the barriers to digitalization, at least we have some research findings to that effect. I'm happy to share the sources for that, like the 2021 study that I cited. Happy to share that after this webinar.
Thank you, Desmond. I can see, Crystal, you look like you're burning with a question. Do you have a question for Desmond?
Thank you. Was it that obvious? Thank you so much for the presentation, and I'm really looking forward to meeting everyone in March. I have a couple of questions, but the burning one is when you talk about barriers, you talked about access and infrastructure, but I didn't hear you really speak to languages, and I don't know in different countries if you have situations where not being in person could also be an issue relative to comprehension, language. My finding, and I'm practicing in the United States, but my finding here has been that when people are speaking a different language, even if there's all the technology, being in person really bridges so many gaps. So is that a factor or anything that has been considered, given that maybe different people speak different languages?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think when it comes to languages, at least For the African perspective, the court normally uses the official languages in a particular jurisdiction. So for instance, if it is Kenya, they would use English and or Kiswahili for purposes of their communication. So if you're not able to communicate in English, most people will be able to communicate in Kiswahili. In Rwanda, the official languages is English or Kinyarwanda. So, they are able to still communicate and participate in that online dispute resolution, in the language of their choice. The barrier that I would see when it comes to languages is of course, if there are certain situations you find that maybe a party cannot speak either English or Swahili and can only speak their vernacular, language. And in those cases, what, traditionally has been done is to get an interpreter in the session. So of course, you would have to organize beforehand to have an interpreter available, to aid in communication. Then I think the other barrier is when it comes to digitalization, the e-filing systems are in English. So that may be a barrier for somebody who doesn't understand English, because the instructions on how to file your pleadings in case you're representing yourself, if you are not able to understand English, then you would need somebody to be able to assist you, in that respect. And probably, like the community centers are referred to, if they are also staffed with, volunteers or people who can be able to help them, those who have low digital literacy levels and also have the language barrier to be able to file their pleadings. Probably that's a way of mitigating that barrier. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. Do you have any other question for Desmond? That's it. Okay, that's it. Thank you. And just picking up on what Crystal has said, in terms of language barriers, especially across Africa, it is an issue. But what I've also seen in terms of practice, having been in litigation in Kenya, and then also currently as legal counsel in a company that has operations across Africa, is that a lot of times the courts try to, as much as possible, accommodate the respective litigants, especially those in terms of using vernacular languages or not, who don't understand or speak English or any other languages. They really do so because they're trying to get to support everybody so that they don't exclude certain persons from the court system. So that's one advantage to it. And then in terms of technology, there've been a lot of strides in terms of training and then sharing information on how to use some of the online platforms. But I don't see it.
There seems to be an echo. There seems to be an echo. I don't know if.
Hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, but there's echo.
Oh, there's an echo.
Yeah. Do you have external speakers on, Georgina?
No. The one on my computer. Let me just. Can you hear me now better? Or it's still echoing?
It's still echoing, but we did kind of get the gist of what you were saying.
Okay, that's fine. So let me not echo too much of what I was already saying. At this juncture, does anybody have a question before I thank Des and also ask Claire just to close for us?
You can always reach out to me and ask a question of Desmond if you are just mulling over the webinar contents, and once you've looked at your slides, I'm sure he wouldn't mind answering a question on email if that's something you would prefer later on. And thank you for the offer to share the sources. We'll share those with everyone who's attended along with the slides. you know, there's nothing like a free lunch or a free webinar. So I'm just going to quickly use this opportunity to share my few quick slides on the upcoming conference before I do my thank you. The African Labour Law Society is so delighted to be hosting its 5th conference in Mauritius in the end of March, 6 weeks time. So there's enough time for you to make your travel arrangements. Have a look at the link that was shared in the chat on YouTube, just highlighting some of the 7 reasons why you should consider attending the event. It's going to be at the Intercontinental Hotel in Balaclava at the northern part of Mauritius Island. There are, in the delegate fact sheet on the website, there's some shuttle information. We have travel agents information for you. I just wanted to highlight and thank our sponsors, many of whom are on the webinar as well, and our media partner sponsor, Africa Legal, which is they're fantastic in getting the word out there. As you know, we're a small non-profit organization, so hosting a conference in Mauritius is quite a big task with a small resource body of people, but we are completely committed. We have 120 people registered so far, and it's very exciting. There are 2 ways in which you can participate: physically in Mauritius or virtually online, which is a lot more affordable. And of course, we'd love to see you all there for our party, for our gatherings, for our networking, benchmarking, and general discussion on the future and the current discipline of labor law on the continent. I see that there's a quick question. Oh, Pami's saying hello. Hi, Pami.
Hi, everyone.
Dr.
I'm so
Barmer
sorry.
Is our president of the association, and she'll pick up now. But I just wanted to just highlight the very affordable registration fees, and we really look forward to your attendance. I'm going to hand over to Pami now. We are due to have load shedding in 1 minute. So if we drop off, you will be able to continue. And thanks everybody for joining us. And I'll hand over to Pami to thank Desmond and Georgina for their time.
Okay, thank you so much, Claire. And I'm so sorry for not being here, but duty called at work. Thank you so much to Georgina for holding the fort. And thank you for Desmond for the presentation. We really appreciate your time, and we really appreciate everyone who's come out. And we just look forward to your feedback as to how the webinar went and how we can improve, and whether there are topics that you'd like to hear. And if you'd like to volunteer to present a webinar or a panel discussion, we'd really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And thanks so much, Desmond. Have a good day.
Thanks.